The morning breeze carried Thunder's desperate bellowing across the limestone cliffs of Texas Hill Country as Richard Blackwood's manicured hands trembled against his daughter's wheelchair handles, the metal warm from her small palms gripping the armrests. What happened next would shatter every assumption about fatherly love in America. It wasn't an accident. It was cold, calculated murder. Frank Morrison dropped his coffee mug on the ranch house porch, ceramic exploding against weathered wood as he watched his boss of 28 years push 6-year-old Emma's wheelchair toward the cliff's edge. Sarah Morrison's scream pierced the dawn silence from the kitchen window, her flour-dusted hands pressed against the glass. The child who'd survived a car crash that killed her mother, who'd learned to laugh again despite being paralyzed from the waist down, now faced her greatest betrayal from the one person who should have protected her. "Daddy, why are we so close to the edge?" Emma's voice carried on the wind, innocent and trusting. Thunder charged across the pasture, his massive Brahman frame a blur of black and russet fury, but even at full gallop he was still 50 yards away, too far. Too late. What drove a father to this unthinkable act? And could one faithful bull's witness change everything? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 months earlier, the Blackwood Ranch had been a different place entirely. The fourth-generation cattle operation sprawled across 3,000 acres of Travis County's most beautiful limestone country, where the Pedernales River carved its lazy path through hills that had sheltered the Blackwood family since 1952. The colonial mansion sat like a crown jewel among ancient live oaks, its white columns catching the morning light that filtered through Spanish moss. Emma Rose Blackwood, 6 years old with her mother's cornflower blue eyes and her late grandmother's stubborn chin, navigated her custom wheelchair through the wide hallways with the confidence of someone who'd never known life any other way. The car accident that took her mother's life and left her paralyzed from the waist down had happened when she was 3, young enough that the wheelchair felt as natural as walking had once been to other children. Her laughter still echoed through rooms that had grown too quiet since her mother's death, a sound that could make even the ranch hands smile despite their weathered faces. Thunder had come to them through tragedy, originally purchased as a therapy animal for another family's disabled son. When that boy passed away, the massive Brahman bull found his way to Blackwood Ranch, where something magical happened between him and Emma. At 2,200 pounds of muscle and bone, with a coat the color of coffee and rust, Thunder should have been intimidating. Instead, he became Emma's gentle giant, following her wheelchair with the devotion of a massive 4-legged guardian angel. Richard James Blackwood had once been the kind of father who read bedtime stories and built blanket forts. The accident changed him, carving lines of grief into his 45-year-old face that made him look decades older. Where once there had been warmth, now there was distance. Where there had been spontaneous hugs and whispered "I love yous," now there were awkward silences and avoided eye contact. The man who had once carried Emma on his shoulders now struggled to meet her hopeful gaze. 6 months ago, Victoria Sterling had swept into their lives like a cool breeze on a sweltering Texas afternoon. At 38, she was polished in ways that ranch life rarely produced. Perfectly styled auburn hair, clothes that whispered expensive rather than shouted it, and a smile that could charm money from a miser's wallet. She'd been a pharmaceutical sales representative, she said, used to helping families navigate medical challenges. Richard, drowning in his own grief and the overwhelming responsibility of raising a disabled daughter alone, had been an easy target for her particular brand of sympathetic manipulation. Frank Morrison had worked the Blackwood Ranch for 28 years, since before Richard was born. At 62, the Korean War veteran had seen enough of human nature to recognize trouble when it wore designer shoes and spoke in honeyed tones about difficult situations and quality of life decisions. His wife Sarah, 59 and soft-spoken until riled, had been the ranch's heart since she'd married Frank 35 years ago. She'd lost their only daughter to childhood leukemia, which made her love for Emma fierce and protective in ways that worried Victoria Sterling Blackwood considerably. The first sign something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning 2 weeks before the cliff, when Thunder refused his breakfast. Frank Morrison had been feeding the animals on Blackwood Ranch for nearly 3 decades, and in all that time he'd never seen the massive Brahman bull turn away from his grain. Thunder stood in his stall, his coffee-colored eyes fixed on something beyond the barn walls, ears twitching at sounds only he could hear. "What's got into you, big fella?" Frank murmured, running a weathered hand along Thunder's flank. The bull's muscles were tense, coiled like springs ready to release. His usual gentle rumbling had been replaced by low, anxious lowing that seemed to vibrate through the barn's wooden beams. Inside the main house, Emma was oblivious to her protector's distress as she worked on a surprise Father's Day gift, a hand-painted picture frame decorated with wild flowers she'd pressed between wax paper. Her small fingers, still chubby with childhood, carefully guided the paintbrush around each delicate bloom. "Daddy's gonna love this," she whispered to herself, the way children do when they're plotting something wonderful. But in Richard's study, love was the furthest thing from anyone's mind. Victoria sat perched on the edge of his mahogany desk, insurance documents spread before them like tarot cards predicting a dark future. The papers detailed Emma's life insurance policy, a $50 million trust fund that would remain untouchable until her 18th birthday, unless certain circumstances arose. "Look at these numbers, Richard." Victoria's voice was silk over steel. "The medical expenses alone will bankrupt this ranch within 5 years. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, specialized equipment, modifications to the house, it never ends." She traced a manicured finger down a column of figures that made Richard's hands shake. "And what kind of life is this for her?" "Really, she'll never run, never dance, never have children of her own." Richard stared at the documents, his conscience warring with the crushing weight of responsibility. His gambling debts, $2 million in markers held by men who didn't accept "I'm good for it" as payment, pressed down on him like a physical weight. Victoria had discovered his secret shame 3 weeks ago, and ever since her suggestions had grown bolder, more direct. "There are accidents," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tragic, unavoidable accidents. The limestone cliffs are so treacherous, especially for someone in a wheelchair. One moment of carelessness and—" She let the sentence hang in the air like smoke. Outside the study window, thunder began bellowing, a sound like thunder rolling across the Texas hills, deep and ominous. Sarah Morrison, kneading bread dough in the kitchen, paused at the unfamiliar urgency in the bull's voice. In 35 years of ranch life, she'd learned to read the language of animals better than most people read books. That afternoon, while Emma napped in her room with the painted picture frame hidden under her pillow, Frank made a discovery that chilled him to the bone. Hidden in the ranch's old tack room, beneath a pile of moth-eaten horse blankets, he found insurance investigation reports dating back 6 months. Victoria had been researching accidental death benefits and liability and negligence cases. There were printouts about wheelchair safety, articles about cliff-related fatalities, and most damning of all, a hand-drawn map of the ranch's limestone cliffs with various access points marked in red ink. Frank's Korean War training kicked in. The same instincts that had kept him alive in the frozen hills of Korea now screamed danger. He photographed the documents with his old digital camera, hands steady despite the tremor of rage building in his chest. A man didn't fight for his country just to come home and watch some city woman plot against a helpless child. Meanwhile, Thunder's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He refused to let Emma out of his sight, positioning himself between her wheelchair and any adult who approached. When Victoria tried to pet him during her evening walk, he lowered his massive head and snorted a warning that sent her stumbling backward, designer heels catching in the Texas dirt. "That animal is becoming dangerous," Victoria complained to Richard that night as they lay in the four-poster bed that had once belonged to his great-grandmother. "Maybe we should consider selling him before someone gets hurt." But Thunder wasn't dangerous. He was desperate. Animals possess an intuition that humans have civilized out of themselves, and every fiber of Thunder's being screamed that his beloved Emma was in mortal peril. He began following her wheelchair everywhere, his hooves clicking on the hardwood floors of the main house as he trailed behind her like a 2,200-pound shadow. Emma noticed the change, too. "Thunder's been following me everywhere, Daddy," she mentioned over dinner, her small voice echoing in the formal dining room. "It's like he thinks something bad is going to happen." Richard nearly choked on his wine. Across the table, Victoria's smile never wavered, but her green eyes glittered with something cold and calculating. "Animals can sense things," she said smoothly. "Maybe Thunder knows you need extra protection." The irony wasn't lost on Frank when he overheard this conversation from the kitchen doorway. The bull knew exactly who Emma needed protection from, and it wasn't strangers or wild animals. It was the people who should have loved her most. 2 nights before the cliff, Frank found Richard in the barn at midnight, standing in Thunder's stall with a length of rope in his hands. The bull stood perfectly still, but his eyes held the intelligence that made Frank's breath catch. It was as if Thunder understood exactly what Richard was contemplating and was daring him to try. "Evening, boss," Frank said quietly, stepping into the circle of lamplight. Richard spun around, the rope falling from his nerveless fingers. "Frank, I was just checking on Thunder. He's been acting strange lately." "Yes, sir, he has." Frank's voice carried 30 years of authority earned through loyalty and hard work. "Animals got a sixth sense about danger. Thunder's trying to tell us something, if we're smart enough to listen." Richard's face went pale in the lamplight. Without another word, he pushed past Frank and stumbled toward the house, leaving the rope coiled in the straw like a discarded snake. That night, Thunder didn't sleep. Frank could hear him from the foreman's house, a low rumbling that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. Sarah tossed and turned beside him, finally sitting up in their old four-poster bed. "Something terrible is coming," she whispered in the darkness. "I can feel it in my bones." Frank reached for her hand, feeling the calluses from 40 years of ranch work, and squeezed gently. "Yes, ma'am, I believe it is. But Thunder's watching, and so am I." Outside, under a canopy of Texas stars, Thunder stood vigil in the pasture, his massive silhouette a dark guardian against the night sky. Somewhere in the main house, Emma slept peacefully, unaware that evil was planning her destruction. But Thunder knew, and he was ready. The morning of Father's Day dawned with the deceptive beauty that only Texas could deliver. A sky painted in watercolor pastels of pink and gold, the kind of sunrise that made a person believe in divine providence. Emma Rose Blackwood woke earlier than usual, her small hands immediately reaching under her pillow to check that her surprise gift was still safely hidden. The painted picture frame, decorated with pressed wildflowers from the ranch's meadows, represented weeks of secret work and all the love her 6-year-old heart could hold. "Today's gonna be perfect," she whispered to herself, maneuvering her wheelchair to the window that overlooked Thunder's pasture. The massive Brahman bull stood at the fence line, his dark eyes already fixed on her window as if he'd been waiting for her to appear. Even from this distance, Emma could see the tension in his powerful frame, the way his tail switched with nervous energy. In the kitchen below, Sarah Morrison was already preparing what should have been a celebration breakfast: blueberry pancakes shaped like hearts, Emma's favorite, with real maple syrup and thick-cut bacon from their own smokehouse. But her hands trembled as she mixed the batter, and she kept glancing toward the study where she could hear Victoria's voice, low and insistent, weaving her web of poisonous suggestions around Richard's weakening resolve. "It's Father's Day, Richard," Victoria's voice carried through the house like smoke. "A day to think about what kind of father you really want to be. Do you want to be the man who condemns his daughter to a lifetime of limitations, or the man who sets her free from this prison of flesh?" Her words were carefully chosen, each one a needle finding the exact spot where Richard's guilt and desperation intersected. Richard sat hunched over his desk, the insurance papers spread before him like a road map to hell. The gambling debts pressed down on him, threats from men whose patience had worn as thin as Bible pages. Last night's phone call had been explicit: pay up by week's end, or Emma would become collateral in ways that made his current plan seem merciful by comparison. "She trusts you completely," Victoria continued, moving behind his chair to massage his shoulders with practiced manipulation. "She'll never see it coming. One moment of courage from you, and she'll be at peace. No more pain, no more limitations, no more burden on this family." Thunder's bellowing suddenly erupted from the pasture, a sound like rolling thunder that shook the windows of the main house. The bull had never made such a noise before, primal, desperate, a warning that seemed to come from his very soul. Richard jerked upright, his face pale as parchment. "Even the animals know," Victoria whispered. "Thunder's trying to tell you something." Maybe he understands what needs to happen. But Frank Morrison understood Thunder's language better than anyone, and what he heard wasn't agreement. It was anguish. The old Korean War veteran stood on the front porch, his weathered hands gripping the railing so hard his knuckles went white. 30 years of reading animal behavior told him exactly what Thunder was trying to communicate. Danger. Protect Emma. Danger. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, her wheelchair moving with the quiet efficiency she'd mastered over the years. "Morning, Miss Sarah," she said, her face bright with excitement. "Is Daddy awake yet? I got something special for him." Sarah's heart nearly broke at the pure joy in the child's voice. "He's in his study, sweetheart. Why don't you help me finish these pancakes while we wait?" But Richard was already emerging from the study, his face a mask of forced cheerfulness that didn't reach his eyes. "Emma, darling," he said, his voice strained. "How would you like to go on a special adventure this morning? Just you and me?" Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. Since her mother's death, Richard had withdrawn so completely that any attention from him felt like a precious gift. "Really, Daddy? Where are we going?" "I thought we'd watch the sunrise from the cliffs," Richard said, the words feeling like broken glass in his throat. "You've always loved sunrises, and there's supposed to be something special about the light this morning." Thunder's bellowing intensified, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. Through the kitchen window, Frank could see the bull pacing along the fence line, his massive head tossing with agitation. When Thunder spotted Richard through the window, the bull charged the fence, stopping just short of the wooden rails with a snort that fogged the morning air. "Thunder seems upset about something," Emma observed with the intuitive wisdom that children possess. "Maybe he wants to come too?" "Bulls can't climb cliffs, sweetheart," Richard said quickly. "It'll just be us. Father and daughter time." Victoria appeared in the kitchen doorway, her smile as sharp as a blade. "What a wonderful idea, Richard. Emma will love seeing the sunrise from up there." Her green eyes met Richard's over Emma's head, and in them he saw his own damnation reflected back at him. Frank Morrison had seen enough. As Richard began preparing Emma's lightweight transport wheelchair, the one designed for rough terrain, Frank slipped out the back door and made his way to Thunder's pasture. The bull immediately approached the fence, his dark eyes intelligent and desperate. "I know, big fella," Frank whispered, reaching through the rails to touch Thunder's velvet nose. "I know you're trying to warn us, but what can we do? He's her father." Thunder's response was to rear up on his hind legs, a display of power that sent Frank stumbling backward. When the bull came down, he immediately turned and galloped toward the far end of the pasture, the section that bordered the cliff trail. At the fence line, he began pacing, his hooves wearing a path in the earth as he followed the route Richard would soon take with Emma. Back in the house, Emma was practically vibrating with excitement as she transferred from her regular wheelchair to the lightweight transport model. "This is the best Father's Day ever, Daddy," she said, throwing her small arms around Richard's neck. "I love you so much." The words hit Richard like physical blows. "I love you so much." When was the last time he'd said those words back to her? When was the last time he'd meant them? Victoria's poison had convinced him that love sometimes meant letting go, but holding his daughter's trusting weight against his chest, he felt the first crack in his resolve. "I have a surprise for you too, Daddy," Emma whispered against his ear. "I made you something special, but you have to wait until we get back to see it." Richard's hands began to shake. A surprise. She'd made him something with her own small hands, planning for a future that he was about to ensure would never come. But Victoria was watching from the doorway, her presence a constant reminder of the debts that would come due, the threats that hung over all their heads like storm clouds. "Come on then," Richard managed to say. "Let's go see that sunrise." As he pushed Emma's wheelchair toward the front door, Thunder's bellowing reached a crescendo that seemed to shake the very air around them. Through the window, Frank watched the bull running the fence line, parallel to the cliff trail, his massive frame a blur of desperate motion. Sarah Morrison stood at the kitchen sink, her flour-dusted hands pressed against the window glass, as she watched father and daughter disappear down the trail that led to the limestone cliffs. Behind her, Victoria hummed softly as she poured herself coffee, the sound as chilling as a funeral dirge. "Such a beautiful morning for a walk," Victoria said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of a spider whose web had finally caught its prey. But Thunder had other plans. As Richard's form disappeared around the first bend in the trail, the massive bull backed up 20 paces from the fence, lowered his head, and charged. The wooden rails exploded like matchsticks under 2,200 pounds of desperate fury, and Thunder emerged from the wreckage like an avenging angel, his hooves thundering against the earth as he galloped toward the cliff trail with the single-minded purpose of a creature whose entire world depended on reaching Emma in time. The race was on, and only God knew who would reach the cliff first. The limestone trail wound through ancient live oaks and prickly pear cactus, each turn taking Richard and Emma further from the safety of the ranch house and closer to the precipice that would change everything. Emma chattered excitedly as her father pushed her wheelchair over the rough terrain, pointing out cardinals flashing red through the mesquite trees and mockingbirds performing their elaborate songs from fence posts. "Look, Daddy! There's a roadrunner," she exclaimed, clapping her hands as the comical bird darted across their path. "Mama used to say they brought good luck." Richard's grip tightened on the wheelchair handles. Every mention of her mother was another weight added to the crushing guilt that threatened to buckle his knees. Behind them, the sound of splintering wood and Thunder's desperate bellowing echoed across the hills, but Richard forced himself not to look back. Victoria's voice whispered in his memory, "One moment of courage, and it will all be over." At the main house, Frank Morrison was running toward his pickup truck when the sound of thunder breaking through the fence reached his ears. The sight of the massive bull galloping across the pasture with single-minded determination confirmed his worst fears. Frank had seen enough death in Korea to recognize its approach, and right now it was wearing the face of a desperate father and a manipulative woman. "Sarah!" he shouted toward the house. "Call Sheriff Bradley. Tell him to get to the North Cliffs now." Sarah Morrison appeared at the kitchen door, her face pale with understanding. She'd lived on this ranch long enough to know that Frank's instincts were never wrong, especially when it came to danger. "What about Emma?" she called back. "I'm going after them," Frank replied, gunning the old Ford's engine. "Thunder's got the right idea." In the distance, Thunder's massive frame was already disappearing into the oak grove that bordered the cliff trail. Despite weighing over a ton, the bull moved with surprising grace through the rough terrain, his powerful legs carrying him forward with the desperate energy of a creature whose entire world was in jeopardy. On the trail, Emma was growing quiet as they climbed higher, the cheerful chatter giving way to the contemplative mood that sometimes overtook her during peaceful moments. She pulled a small wrapped package from her jacket pocket, the painted picture frame she'd worked on so carefully. "I was going to wait until we got home, but I can't," she said, turning in her wheelchair to face Richard. "Happy Father's Day, Daddy." Richard's hands trembled as he accepted the gift, his vision blurring as he unwrapped the carefully painted frame. Inside was a photograph of the three of them, Richard, Emma, and her mother, taken just months before the accident. But it was Emma's artwork that destroyed him. Pressed wildflowers arranged around the border, each one painted with painstaking detail, and at the bottom, written in her careful 6-year-old script, "To the best daddy in Texas, I love you forever and always." "Do you like it?" Emma asked anxiously, studying his face for approval. "I picked all the flowers myself. Thunder helped me reach the tall ones." The mention of Thunder sent a fresh wave of guilt through Richard's chest. Even the bull had shown more care for Emma than her own father was about to demonstrate. But the debts pressed down on him like physical weight, $2 million owed to men who had already made it clear that Emma's safety was negotiable if payment wasn't forthcoming. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Richard managed to whisper, carefully placing the frame in his jacket pocket. "The most beautiful gift I've ever received." Behind them, Thunder crashed through the underbrush with the desperation of a creature racing against time. His massive hooves found purchase on rocks that would have sent smaller animals tumbling, his sure-footed climb a testament to the bond that drove him forward. Every few strides he would pause to bellow, a sound that carried for miles across the Texas hills, a warning and a plea rolled into one primal cry. Frank's pickup truck bounced along the ranch road that paralleled the cliff trail, his knuckles white on the steering wheel as he pushed the old Ford to its limits. Through gaps in the trees, he could see Thunder's dark form moving through the oak grove with surprising speed. The bull had cut a diagonal path up the hillside, taking advantage of game trails that would bring him to the cliff from a different angle. "Come on, you magnificent beast," Frank muttered under his breath. "Show them what loyalty really looks like." At the sheriff's office in town, Deputy Martinez was just settling in with his morning coffee when Sarah Morrison's frantic call came through. "Ma'am, you need to slow down," he said, grabbing for his notebook. "You're saying there's going to be an attempted murder at the Blackwood Ranch?" "At the cliffs," Sarah gasped, her voice breaking with emotion. "Richard's taken Emma up there, and I think, God help us, I think he means to hurt her. Frank's gone after them, but you need to get up there now." Deputy Martinez had known the Blackwood family for years, had watched Emma grow from a bright-eyed toddler into a remarkable little girl who faced each day with courage that humbled grown men. The idea that her own father would harm her seemed impossible, but the desperation in Sarah Morrison's voice convinced him that, impossible or not, it might be happening. On the cliff trail, Richard and Emma had reached the final approach to the overlook. The limestone precipice stretched before them, a 200-foot drop to the rocks below where the Pedernales River carved its ancient path through the Texas hills. Emma gasped with delight at the view, her small hands pressed together in wonder. "Oh, Daddy, it's so beautiful," she breathed. "Look how far you can see. There's the river, and the highway, and— Is that thunder?" Richard's blood turned to ice water as he followed Emma's pointing finger. Across the ravine, Thunder had emerged from the oak grove and was now standing on a parallel ridge, his massive form silhouetted against the morning sky. Even at this distance, the bull's agitation was visible. He paced back and forth along the ridge line, his head tossing with anxiety as he searched for a way across the gulf that separated him from Emma. "What's Thunder doing way over there?" Emma asked, concerned. "He looks upset." Richard positioned the wheelchair closer to the cliff edge, his heart hammering against his ribs. Victoria's voice echoed in his memory, quick and clean. "She'll never know what happened." But looking down at his daughter's trusting face, Richard felt his resolve crumbling like the ancient limestone beneath their feet. Thunder's bellowing intensified, the sound bouncing off the cliff faces and creating an eerie echo that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The bull had found a narrow deer path that switchbacked down into the ravine, and despite the dangerous terrain, he was attempting the descent. Rocks scattered under his hooves, creating small avalanches that crashed into the brush below. "Daddy, Thunder's coming down that steep path," Emma said, her voice tight with worry. "He could get hurt. We should help him." "Thunder knows what he's doing," Richard said, his voice hollow. He moved behind the wheelchair, his hands gripping the handle so tightly his knuckles went white. Victoria's words echoed in his mind. "One push, one moment, and all your problems disappear." But Emma's problems wouldn't disappear. They would end forever, along with her laughter, her artwork, her bright commentary on roadrunners and wildflowers. Richard looked down at his daughter's small head, at the way her hair caught the morning light like spun gold, and felt something fundamental break inside his chest. Frank's pickup truck skidded to a stop at the trailhead just as Thunder reached the bottom of the ravine. The bull paused for a moment, his sides heaving from exertion, before plunging into the swift-running creek that separated him from the cliff where Emma sat in mortal danger. The water came up to Thunder's belly, the current strong enough to stagger even his massive frame, but he pressed forward with the determination of a creature who would rather die than fail in his mission. "Sweet Jesus," Frank whispered, grabbing his rifle from the gun rack behind the truck's seat. He'd brought the weapon out of habit, but now he realized it might be needed. Not for Thunder, but for the man who was about to betray everything decent about fatherhood. On the cliff, Emma had noticed her father's strange stillness. She turned in her wheelchair to look up at him, her blue eyes filled with innocent concern. "Daddy, are you okay? You look sad." Richard stared down into those eyes, his late wife's eyes, and saw his own reflection staring back. What would Margaret think if she could see him now? What would she say about the man who had promised to love and protect their daughter, standing poised to commit the ultimate betrayal? "Emma," Richard said, his voice breaking, "I need you to know that whatever happens, I do love you, more than you'll ever know." Emma's face scrunched up in confusion. "What do you mean, whatever happens?" "Daddy, you're scaring me." Thunder emerged from the creek like a force of nature, water streaming from his powerful frame as he began the treacherous climb up the cliff face. His hooves found purchase on narrow ledges, his massive muscles bunching and releasing as he pulled himself upward with the desperate grace of a creature driven by pure love. Every few feet he would pause to bellow, a sound that now carried a different tone, urgent and commanding, as if he were calling Emma away from danger. Frank was running up the trail now, his 62-year-old legs pumping with the determination of a much younger man. Behind him, the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. Deputy Martinez, responding to Sarah's call. But Frank knew they might all be too late. Thunder was still 50 yards below the cliff top, and Richard Blackwood stood at the edge of an abyss that was spiritual as much as physical. "Emma, I want you to listen to me very carefully," Richard said, his hands beginning to shake on the wheelchair handles. "There are some things in this world that are too heavy for one person to carry alone." "Like what, Daddy?" Richard's answer came out as a broken whisper. "Like the weight of failing everyone you've ever loved." At that moment, Thunder's massive head appeared over the cliff edge, his dark eyes locking onto Richard's with an intelligence that seemed almost human. The bull's message was crystal clear: touch her, and I will end you. But Richard was beyond threats now, beyond reason, beyond everything except the crushing weight of debt and desperation, and Victoria's poisonous whispers. His hands began to push forward, the wheelchair's wheels inching closer to the precipice, and Emma finally understood what was happening. "Daddy, no!" she screamed, her small hands gripping the wheelchair's armrests. "Daddy, please!" Thunder hauled himself over the cliff edge with a roar that shook the heavens, his massive frame launching forward just as Richard made his final desperate push toward damnation. Time seemed to suspend itself in that crystalline moment when everything hung in balance. Richard's trembling hands pushing forward, Emma's terrified scream cutting through the morning air, and Thunder's massive frame launching across the cliff top like 2,000 pounds of righteous fury. The wheelchair's front wheels tilted over the limestone edge, gravity beginning its inexorable pull when Thunder's shoulders slammed into Richard with the force of a freight train. Richard flew sideways, his body crashing into a stand of prickly pear cactus with a wet thud that knocked the wind from his lungs. The wheelchair, already committed to its deadly trajectory, seemed to hover for an impossible moment before Thunder's massive head swept underneath it, his powerful neck muscles straining as he literally caught the chair on his broad back. Emma's scream transformed into gasps of terror as she found herself perched on Thunder's back, the wheelchair somehow balanced across his shoulders like a grotesque saddle. The bull's legs trembled with the effort of supporting the additional weight while maintaining his footing on the crumbling cliff edge. One wrong move would send them both plummeting to the rocks below. "Don't move, sweetheart," a familiar voice called from behind them. Frank Morrison emerged from the oak grove, his rifle trained not on Thunder, but on Richard, who was struggling to extract himself from the cactus patch, blood streaming from dozens of puncture wounds. "Thunder's got you. Just stay real still." The bull's intelligence had never been more evident than in that moment. Instead of panicking at the unfamiliar weight distribution, Thunder began a careful, measured retreat from the cliff edge, each step calculated to maintain the precarious balance of wheelchair and child on his broad back. His breathing was labored, steam rising from his nostrils in the cool morning air, but his eyes remained fixed and focused. "That's it, big fella," Frank murmured, approaching slowly with his hands visible. "Easy does it. You're the hero of this story." Behind them, Richard had managed to stand, his expensive shirt torn and bloody, his face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. What did I almost do?" he whispered, staring at his daughter balanced impossibly on Thunder's back. "Sweet Jesus, what was I about to do?" The sound of sirens grew louder, multiple vehicles now racing up the ranch road toward the cliff trail. Deputy Martinez's voice crackled over his radio as he coordinated with the sheriff's department and emergency medical services. "We need a helicopter up here," he reported. "Possible rescue situation at the Blackwood Cliffs." Emma, still frozen with terror on Thunder's back, began to weep silent tears that tracked down her cheeks like diamond trails. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible above Thunder's labored breathing, "why did you try to hurt me?" The question hit Richard like a physical blow. He dropped to his knees on the rocky ground, his hands clutching at the limestone as if trying to anchor himself to reality. "I don't know, baby girl. I don't know what's wrong with me." Thunder, still supporting Emma's wheelchair with superhuman effort, turned his massive head to fix Richard with a stare that seemed to look straight into his soul. The bull's message was unmistakable. This is what love looks like. This is what protection means. Frank kept his rifle trained on Richard, though his weathered face showed more pity than anger. "Son, you've got about 30 seconds to explain yourself before Sheriff Bradley gets up here and arrests you for attempted murder." "Victoria!" Richard gasped, the name escaping him like a confession. She convinced me it was mercy. That Emma would be better off. That I would be setting her free from a life of suffering." The words sounded insane even as he spoke them, the spell of manipulation finally breaking in the face of what he'd almost done. "Where is she now?" Frank demanded, his finger hovering near the rifle's trigger. "At the house, waiting for—" Richard couldn't finish the sentence. Waiting for confirmation that Emma was dead, waiting to console the grieving widower, waiting to claim her share of a $50 million trust fund. Thunder began moving more deliberately now, carrying Emma away from the cliff edge toward safer ground. His hooves found purchase on solid limestone, each step a testament to the bond between the bull and the child who trusted him with her life. Emma remained perfectly still, instinctively understanding that any sudden movement could spell disaster for both of them. "Frank," she whispered, her voice trembling but clear. "Thunder saved me."
"He really saved me." "Yes, ma'am, he surely did," Frank replied, keeping pace with the bull while maintaining his watch on Richard. "Thunder's been trying to tell us something for days. Guess we should have listened sooner." The first sheriff's deputy crested the hill just as Thunder reached the relative safety of the oak grove. Deputy Martinez took in the scene with the trained eye of a 20-year law enforcement veteran. The blood-soaked man kneeling by the cliff edge, the old rancher with the rifle, and most impossibly, a 6-year-old girl in a wheelchair balanced on the back of a massive bull. "Jesus Christ," Martinez breathed into his radio. "Dispatch, we're going to need animal control up here. And a crane. And probably a priest." Thunder, seeming to sense that help had arrived, carefully lowered himself to the ground in a controlled descent that would have impressed professional animal trainers. The wheelchair slid gently from his back onto solid earth, Emma still strapped safely inside. The moment she was secure, Thunder collapsed beside her, his massive frame heaving with exhaustion. Emma immediately wheeled herself to Thunder's head, her small hands stroking his velvet nose as tears of gratitude streamed down her face. "Thank you," she whispered to the bull. "Thank you for saving me from Daddy." The words hit Richard like bullets. His own daughter was thanking an animal for protecting her from him. The weight of what he'd almost done crashed over him like a tsunami, and he began to sob. Great, racking sobs that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. Sheriff Bradley arrived with the paramedics, his weathered face grim as he surveyed the scene. He'd known the Blackwood family for 30 years, had watched Emma grow from a bright-eyed baby into the remarkable child she'd become, despite her disabilities. The idea that Richard would try to harm her was almost beyond comprehension. "Frank, what happened up here?" Bradley asked, his hand resting on his service weapon. Frank lowered his rifle, his voice steady despite the tremor of rage that still coursed through him. "Richard Blackwood just tried to push his daughter off this cliff. Thunder stopped him." Bradley's eyes moved from Richard still sobbing on his knees to Emma being examined by paramedics while Thunder watched protectively from beside her wheelchair. "You're telling me that bull saved the girl's life?" "Broke through his fence, climbed up a cliff face and caught her wheelchair on his back when Richard pushed it over the edge," Frank confirmed. "If I hadn't seen it myself, I wouldn't believe it." The paramedics were amazed to find Emma essentially unharmed, shaken and traumatized but without serious physical injury.
Thunder, despite his heroic exertions, showed no signs of strain beyond normal exhaustion. The bull remained close to Emma throughout the examination, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "Sir," one of the paramedics addressed Sheriff Bradley, "we need to transport the child to the hospital for observation, but she's asking if Thunder can come with her." Bradley looked at the massive bull, then at Emma's pleading face. In 30 years of law enforcement, he'd seen a lot of strange things, but this was definitely a first. "How exactly does one transport a 2,000-pound bull to the hospital?" "We don't," came a new voice from the trail. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the county's chief pediatrician and Deputy Martinez's sister, had arrived with the medical helicopter crew. "But we can bring the hospital to them. Emma's vitals are stable, and separating her from her protector right now would cause more trauma than the original incident." Richard, finally able to stand without collapsing, approached the group with hesitant steps. Blood still seeped from his cactus wounds, and his face was streaked with dirt and tears. "Emma," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I'm sick in my head. I need help." Emma looked up at her father from beside Thunder's massive head, her blue eyes holding a wisdom far beyond her 6 years. "Are you going to hurt me again, Daddy?" The question destroyed what was left of Richard's composure. "No," he choked out. "Never again. I promise you. Never again." Sheriff Bradley stepped forward with his handcuffs. "Richard Blackwood, you're under arrest for attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent." As the Miranda rights echoed across the Texas hills, Thunder lifted his great head and looked directly at Richard. For a moment, man and bull regarded each other across a gulf that was far wider than the physical space between them. Thunder's gaze held no anger, no hatred, only a profound disappointment that seemed to say, "This is not what fathers do." The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder as the medical crew prepared for the most unusual patient transport in Travis County history. Emma would ride in the helicopter while Thunder was loaded into a specially equipped trailer that would follow by road. They would not be separated, not after what they had endured together. As Richard was led away in handcuffs, he turned for one last look at his daughter. Emma was stroking Thunder's neck, whispering words of comfort to the bull who had risked everything to save her life. The image would haunt Richard for the rest of his days. Not just what he had almost done, but what love actually looked like when it was pure and selfless and true. Thunder had shown them all what it meant to love without condition, to protect without thought of cost, to choose life over death even when the odds seemed impossible. In a world where fathers could become monsters, sometimes it took a beast to remind them what it meant to be human. The Travis County Hospital had never seen anything like the convoy that arrived that afternoon. Emma rode in the medical helicopter, her small hand pressed against the window as she watched Thunder's trailer following the ambulance route below. The massive bull had been sedated for transport, but even in his drug-induced calm, he'd refused to settle until he could see Emma through the trailer's viewing window. Dr. Rebecca Martinez met them at the hospital's emergency entrance, her professional composure barely masking her amazement at the day's events. "In 20 years of pediatric medicine, I've never treated a child whose life was saved by a bull," she told the gathered medical staff. "But then again, I've never met a child quite like Emma Blackwood." As Emma was wheeled into the pediatric wing, Thunder's trailer was positioned in the hospital's courtyard where the bull could see her window. The arrangement was unprecedented, but Dr. Martinez had insisted. "That animal just saved this child's life," she'd told the hospital administrator. "The least we can do is honor their bond." Inside Emma's room, the full weight of trauma began to settle over her like a dark cloud. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the morning's terror was fading, replaced by the devastating realization that her own father had tried to kill her. She sat in her wheelchair by the window, watching Thunder pace restlessly in the courtyard below, and began to shake with delayed shock. "He tried to push me off the cliff," she whispered to Sarah Morrison, who had arrived within an hour of the incident. "My daddy tried to make me fall." Sarah gathered the child into her arms, her own tears falling freely as she held Emma against her chest. "I know, sweetheart, I know. But you're safe now." Thunder made sure of that. The criminal investigation was moving swiftly. Sheriff Bradley had obtained search warrants for both the main house and Richard's study, where they discovered evidence that painted a devastating picture of manipulation and premeditated murder. Victoria's research into insurance fraud, her correspondence with a criminal attorney about accelerated inheritance laws, and most damning of all, recordings on her phone where she coached Richard through scenarios for Emma's accidental death. But Victoria Sterling Blackwood was nowhere to be found. When deputies arrived at the ranch house to arrest her, they discovered her car missing and her belongings hastily packed. A BOLO alert went out across Texas law enforcement, but Victoria had vanished like smoke in the wind. Frank Morrison sat in the hospital waiting room, his weathered hands clasped tightly together as he wrestled with emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. For 28 years, he'd watched Emma grow from a bright-eyed baby into the remarkable child she'd become. The thought that he'd almost lost her to her own father's twisted judgment filled him with a rage that burned like acid in his chest. "She's asking for you," Sarah said, appearing in the waiting room doorway. "Both of you." Frank followed Sarah down the sterile hospital corridor to Emma's room, where the little girl sat by the window watching Thunder in the courtyard below. The bull had settled into a protective stance facing her window, his massive head raised as if standing guard. "Mr. Frank," Emma said, her voice small and fragile, "is Thunder going to be okay? He looks tired." Frank knelt beside her wheelchair, his rough hands gentle as he took her small ones in his. "Thunder's just fine, little one. He's tired because he did something incredible today. He saved the most important person in the world." "I don't understand why Daddy wanted to hurt me," Emma continued, her blue eyes filled with confusion that no 6-year-old should have to experience. "Did I do something wrong? Was I too much trouble because of my wheelchair?" The question broke Frank's heart into 1,000 pieces. "No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. Your daddy is sick in his mind and he let a bad woman convince him of terrible things. But that has nothing to do with you. You're perfect exactly as you are." Dr. Martinez entered the room with Emma's medical charts, her expression professionally neutral but her eyes soft with compassion. "Emma's physical examination shows no injuries from today's incident," she reported. "But we need to discuss long-term psychological support. What she's experienced will require extensive therapy." "What about Thunder?" Emma asked immediately. "Can he stay with me? I don't want to be alone." Dr. Martinez glanced at Frank and Sarah, recognizing the unspoken communication between them. "That's something we need to discuss with social services." "Emma, honey, your father's going to be in jail for a very long time. We need to figure out where you're going to live." The weight of Emma's situation was beginning to settle over everyone in the room. With Richard facing attempted murder charges and Victoria fled as a fugitive, Emma was essentially orphaned. The Blackwood Ranch would likely be seized as evidence, leaving her without home or family. "She belongs with us," Sarah said firmly, speaking the words that Frank's heart had been screaming since the moment he'd found Emma on Thunder's back. "If the courts will allow it, Frank and I want to be her guardians." Emma's face brightened for the first time since the cliff incident. "Really? You'd want me?" Frank's voice was thick with emotion as he answered, "Little one, we've loved you like our own since the day you were born. Nothing would make us happier than making it official." Outside in the courtyard, Thunder lifted his massive head and bellowed, a sound that carried across the hospital grounds and seemed to shake the very walls. But this time, the sound wasn't one of warning or distress. It was a call of triumph, a declaration that echoed across the Texas hills like a promise. The innocent would be protected, love would prevail, and sometimes salvation came with 4 legs and a heart bigger than the sky. As the sun set over Travis County, painting the hospital walls in shades of gold and crimson, Emma pressed her small hand against the window glass. Below, Thunder stood sentinel in the gathering dusk, his dark form a guardian silhouette against the Texas evening. They had faced the darkness together and emerged into the light, forever bonded by a love that transcended the boundaries between human and animal, between protector and protected. The worst was over, but the healing was just beginning. 3 weeks after the Cliff incident, the truth began unraveling like a ball of yarn in the hands of a determined cat. Emma was staying temporarily with Frank and Sarah Morrison in their modest foreman's house while the legal machinery ground slowly forward, processing custody papers and criminal charges. Thunder had been moved to a pasture adjacent to their property, where he maintained his protective vigil over the little girl who had become his entire world. The breakthrough came when FBI agent Patricia Holbrook arrived from Austin with a file thick enough to choke a horse. Victoria Sterling Blackwood, it turned out, wasn't just a manipulative gold digger. She was a serial killer with a pattern spanning 3 states and 7 years. "We've been tracking her for 18 months, Agent Holbrook explained to Sheriff Bradley as they sat in his cramped office. "She targets wealthy widowers with disabled children, infiltrates their lives, and then orchestrates the children's deaths for inheritance money." The file contained photographs that made Sheriff Bradley's stomach turn. 3 families in California, 2 in Arizona, 1 in New Mexico, all with the same devastating pattern. Disabled children who died in tragic accidents shortly after their fathers remarried mysterious women with sterling credentials and sympathetic smiles. "Her real name is Victoria Marsh," Agent Holbrook continued. "She had a son named Michael who was born with spina bifida. Instead of caring for him, she smothered him when he was 5 years old and collected on his life insurance. That was her first taste of what she calls mercy killing for profit." Sheriff Bradley studied the crime scene photos from Victoria's previous victims. A boy with cerebral palsy who fell downstairs, a girl with muscular dystrophy who accidentally drowned in a bathtub, twin brothers with autism who died in a house fire that investigators could never quite prove was arson. "Richard Blackwood wasn't her partner," Agent Holbrook explained. "He was her victim too. She spent months breaking down his psychological defenses, convincing him that Emma would be better off dead than disabled. It's a pattern we've seen before. She's a master manipulator who can make good people believe evil things." Back at the Morrison house, Emma was slowly beginning to heal under Sarah's maternal care and Frank's gentle guidance. But the nightmares still came. Dark dreams where she fell through endless Kong while her father's voice whispered apologies that came too late. "Thunder's outside," Sarah would remind her during the worst nights. "He's keeping watch. Nothing bad can happen while Thunder's there." And Thunder was indeed keeping watch. The massive bull had positioned himself where he could see both Emma's bedroom window and the approach road to the Morrison property. Local veterinarian Dr. James Crawford had examined him after the Cliff incident and declared Thunder to be in perfect health despite his heroic exertions. "I've been practicing veterinary medicine for 30 years, Dr. Crawford told Frank. "I've seen guard dogs, protective horses, even a goose that defended a farm from intruders. But I've never seen anything like the bond between that bull and Emma. It's almost supernatural." The legal proceedings were complex but moving steadily forward. Richard's attorney had negotiated a plea agreement in exchange for his full cooperation in finding Victoria and testifying about her methods of manipulation. He would serve 15 years for attempted murder, with the possibility of parole in 10 if his cooperation led to Victoria's capture. "Your daddy wants to see you," Frank told Emma one afternoon as they watched Thunder grazing in the adjacent pasture. "The lawyers say it's your choice." Emma considered this carefully, her small face serious beyond her years. "Will Thunder be able to see me if I go? I don't want to be somewhere Thunder can't see me." Frank's heart broke a little more at her words. The child who had once trusted completely now needed the reassurance of her four-legged guardian to feel safe anywhere. "We can arrange that, little one. Thunder can come in the trailer and wait outside the courthouse." The meeting between Emma and Richard took place in a family conference room at the Travis County Courthouse, with Thunder's trailer positioned outside the window where both could see each other. Richard had aged a decade in 3 weeks. His hair was gray at the temples, his face gaunt from sleepless nights and the weight of his guilt. "Emma," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need you to know that what I did had nothing to do with you. You're perfect. You've always been perfect." Emma studied her father's face with the analytical gaze of a child who had learned that adults could lie, could hurt, could break promises that should have been sacred. "Victoria made you think bad things about me?" "Yes," Richard admitted. "She spent months telling me that you would never be happy, that keeping you alive was selfish. She showed me documents about other disabled children who lived sad lives, and she made me believe that pushing you off that cliff would be an act of love. But Thunder knew better," Emma said simply. "Thunder knew you were wrong." The truth of that statement hit Richard like a physical blow. An animal had shown more wisdom, more love, more protective instinct than he had. "Thunder saved you from me," Richard whispered, "and I'll spend the rest of my life grateful that he did." 2 days later, the call came that everyone had been waiting for. Victoria Sterling Blackwood had been captured at a truck stop outside El Paso, attempting to board a bus to Mexico with a fake passport and $200,000 in cash, money she'd stolen from Richard's business accounts after the Cliff incident. Sheriff Bradley and Agent Holbrook drove to the Morrison house to deliver the news personally. Emma was in the pasture with Thunder, practicing her wheelchair navigation on the gentle slopes while the bull walked protectively beside her. "She's been arrested," Agent Holbrook announced. "Victoria's been charged with 7 counts of first-degree murder, multiple counts of fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder in Emma's case." Emma looked up from her wheelchair, her blue eyes clear and calm. "Will she try to hurt other kids like me?" "Not anymore," Sheriff Bradley assured her. "She's going to prison for the rest of her life." Frank felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. "What about the ranch? What happens to Emma's inheritance?" "That's the good news," Agent Holbrook explained. "Since Richard was a victim of Victoria's manipulation rather than a willing partner, the trust fund remains intact. Emma will inherit the full $50 million when she turns 18, but more importantly, the ranch has been released from evidence seizure. If you're granted permanent custody, you can move back to the main house whenever you're ready." Emma's face lit up at this news. "Thunder can come home to his real pasture?" "Thunder can go anywhere you go," Frank promised. "We're a package deal now." As the legal machinery continued to grind toward resolution, something beautiful began to emerge from the ashes of tragedy. The Travis County community rallied around Emma in ways that restored faith in human nature. Donations poured in for her medical care and therapy. Volunteers offered to help renovate the main house to better accommodate her wheelchair, and local businesses organized fundraisers to support other disabled children in the area. But perhaps the most remarkable development was Thunder's transformation into something approaching a local celebrity. News crews from across Texas came to interview the hero bull of Travis County, and animal behaviorists arrived to study the unique bond between Emma and her protector. What we're seeing here challenges everything we thought we knew about animal intelligence and emotional capacity. Dr. Margaret Chen from Texas A&M University explained to the gathered media, Thunder's actions on that cliff demonstrate not just protective instinct but conscious decision-making, risk assessment, and what can only be described as love. Emma, sitting in her wheelchair beside Thunder as cameras rolled, was asked by a reporter what she thought made Thunder so special. Her answer was simple and devastating in its truth. Thunder loves me the way daddies are supposed to love their little girls. He would never hurt me, not ever. The words echoed across Texas and beyond. A 6-year-old's innocent indictment of the adults who had failed her and celebration of the animal who had saved her. In a world where fathers could become monsters, sometimes it took a beast to show them what love actually looked like. Victoria Sterling Blackwood would spend the rest of her life in prison, paying for her crimes against innocent children. Richard would serve his time and hopefully find redemption in the knowledge that his daughter was safe and loved. But Thunder would continue his vigil, standing guard over the little girl whose trust he had earned with courage and whose love he had won with devotion that knew no bounds. The healing could finally begin. Christmas morning arrived at the Blackwood Ranch with the kind of pristine beauty that made Texas Hill Country postcards famous. Crystalline air that carried the scent of cedar and wood smoke, limestone cliffs painted gold by the rising sun, and frost that turned the pasture grass into fields of diamonds. But the most beautiful sight of all was Emma Rose Morrison Blackwood, officially adopted now, racing her wheelchair across the front porch with the kind of unbridled joy that had been missing from her life for far too long. The adoption had been finalized 3 weeks earlier in a courthouse ceremony that made hardened bailiffs wipe their eyes. Judge Patricia Williams, a grandmother herself, had never presided over a case that touched her heart quite like Emma's. When asked if she wanted Frank and Sarah Morrison to be her legal parents, Emma's response had been immediate and emphatic. "They already are in my heart." This just makes it official for everyone else. Thunder had been there too, of course, standing in the courthouse parking lot in his custom trailer, his massive head visible through the window as he watched the proceedings. The bull had become such an integral part of Emma's life that the adoption decree included special provisions for his care and housing. As Judge Williams had noted with a smile, "In all my years on the bench, this is the first adoption that comes with its own livestock clause." Now, 6 months after the cliff incident, the Blackwood Ranch had been transformed into something Margaret Blackwood could never have imagined, but would surely have approved of. The main house had been renovated with ramps, wider doorways, and specialized equipment that allowed Emma to navigate every room with independence. But more importantly, it had been filled with laughter again, the sound of a child who felt safe, loved, and treasured beyond measure. Frank had officially retired from his position as foreman to become Emma's full-time guardian and ranch manager, though at 63 he attacked the job with the energy of a man half his age. The ranch operations had been expanded to include a therapeutic riding program for disabled children, with Thunder serving as the gentle giant who helped other kids overcome their fears and limitations. "Thunder's got a gift," Dr. Rebecca Martinez observed during one of her regular visits to check on the program's participants. "He seems to know exactly how much pressure to apply, how close to stand, how to move to make each child feel safe. It's like he understands their disabilities better than some doctors do." Sarah had transformed the ranch house kitchen into the kind of warm, welcoming space where neighbors dropped by for coffee and children felt free to raid the cookie jar. Her Christmas morning breakfast spread would have impressed a 5-star hotel: homemade cinnamon rolls, scrambled eggs from the ranch's own chickens, thick-cut bacon, and enough hot chocolate to float a small boat. "Miss Sarah?" Emma called from the living room. "Thunder's at the window again. I think he wants to come inside for Christmas." Sarah laughed, the sound echoing through the house like music. That bull's got more manners than most people, but I draw the line at livestock in my living room. Besides, you'll be outside with him soon enough." The living room had been decorated with the kind of thoughtful touches that spoke of a family that had learned to treasure every moment together. Emma's artwork covered one entire wall, paintings of Thunder in various poses, crayon drawings of their family, including Thunder with a Christmas hat, and her latest masterpiece, a watercolor of the sunrise she and her adoptive parents had watched together from the safe hillside behind the house. Under the massive Christmas tree, presents waited in carefully sorted piles. Emma's gifts reflected the new reality of her life. Art supplies for her growing talent, adaptive sports equipment for her therapeutic programs, and books about animal behavior that fed her fascination with Thunder's remarkable intelligence. But the most important gift couldn't be wrapped in paper and tied with ribbon. It was the simple, profound security of knowing she was loved unconditionally by people who would never hurt her, never abandon her, never see her disability as anything but one small facet of the remarkable person she was becoming. "Ready for the grand tour?" Frank asked, wheeling Emma's outdoor chair onto the front porch. The custom-built wheelchair was designed for ranch terrain, with oversized wheels and a reinforced frame that could handle everything from gravel roads to pasture grass. Emma's face lit up as they approached Thunder's pasture. The massive bull had been waiting by the fence since dawn, his breath creating small clouds in the crisp morning air. When he saw Emma approaching, he began the low, rumbling vocalization that had become his trademark greeting, a sound somewhere between a purr and a freight train that never failed to make Emma giggle. "Merry Christmas, Thunder," Emma said, reaching through the fence rails to stroke his velvet nose. "Look what Santa brought you." From her wheelchair bag, she produced a specially made halter decorated with jingle bells and red ribbons. Thunder stood perfectly still as she fitted it over his massive head, his dark eyes patient and gentle as Emma fumbled with the buckles. When she finished, he shook his head once, sending a cascade of musical notes across the morning air. The transformation of Thunder from working bull to therapeutic partner had been remarkable. Dr. James Crawford had worked with animal behaviorists from 3 universities to develop a training program that harnessed Thunder's natural protective instincts while teaching him specialized responses to different types of disabilities. The bull now understood hand signals, voice commands, and most remarkably, seemed to instinctively adjust his behavior based on each child's specific needs. "He's like a 2,000-pound therapy dog," Dr. Crawford often told visitors. "But I've never seen a therapy animal with this level of emotional intelligence." Thunder doesn't just respond to commands, he anticipates needs. As if to demonstrate this point, Thunder moved closer to the fence and lowered his massive head so Emma could wrap her arms around his neck. It was their daily ritual, this moment of connection that seemed to restore both of them. For Emma, it was reassurance that her protector was healthy and happy. For Thunder, it was confirmation that his most important responsibility, keeping Emma safe, remained unchanged. Frank watched this interaction with the same wonder he'd felt 6 months ago when Thunder had saved Emma's life. The bond between them defied scientific explanation, but its power was undeniable. Emma had not only recovered from her traumatic experience, but had grown stronger, more confident, more determined to help other children who faced similar challenges. The therapeutic riding program had expanded beyond Frank's wildest dreams. Children came from across Texas to work with Thunder and the 3 other gentle giants that had joined the ranch's therapeutic herd. Emma served as a junior instructor, her own experience with disability giving her a unique perspective on helping others overcome their fears. "When I first got in my wheelchair after the accident, I was scared of everything," she would tell new participants. "But Thunder taught me that being different doesn't mean being less. It just means being special in your own way." The success stories were mounting. a boy with cerebral palsy who learned to control his spasms while riding, a girl with autism who spoke her first words while brushing Thunder's coat, teenagers with spinal injuries who regained hope for their futures after experiencing the independence that came with mastering adaptive riding techniques. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation had been in the community itself. Travis County had embraced the ranch's new mission with enthusiasm that surprised even Frank. Local businesses donated equipment and services, volunteers helped with daily operations, and families traveled from hundreds of miles away to participate in the program. "What you've built here," Sheriff Bradley told Frank during a Christmas morning visit, "it's become something bigger than just a ranch. It's become a symbol of what's possible when people choose love over fear, hope over despair." The morning's activities culminated with the traditional Christmas ride. Emma and Thunder leading a parade of therapeutic riders and their families on a gentle tour of the ranch's most beautiful trails. The limestone cliffs, where tragedy had almost struck, were visible in the distance, but they no longer held power over Emma's dreams. Instead, they served as a reminder of how far she'd come and how strong she'd grown. As the sun reached its zenith over the Texas hills, casting everything in golden light that seemed to bless the gathering, Emma realized something profound. She was exactly where she belonged, with exactly the family she was meant to have, doing exactly the work she was born to do. "You know what the best part about this Christmas is?" she asked Frank as they watched Thunder interact with a shy 7-year-old boy who was experiencing his first therapeutic ride. "What's that, little one?" "Everything," Emma said simply. "Just everything." Thunder lifted his massive head and bellowed his agreement, the sound carrying across the ranch like a declaration of joy. In the distance, church bells began to ring, their bronze voices joining Thunder's in a chorus that seemed to celebrate not just Christmas, but the miracle of love that had transformed tragedy into triumph, fear into courage, and a broken family into something beautiful and whole. The story that had begun with betrayal and terror had ended with love and hope, proving once again that sometimes the most profound truths about human nature come from the animals who share our world. Thunder had shown them all what unconditional love looked like, and in doing so had helped heal not just Emma, but an entire community. As the Christmas bells continued to ring across Travis County, Emma Morrison Blackwood sat in her wheelchair beside her gentle giant, surrounded by family and friends, knowing with absolute certainty that she was loved, protected, and treasured exactly as she was. It was, as she had said, everything. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about romance. They're about the unbreakable bonds that form when we least expect them. Emma's story reminds us that family isn't always about blood. It's about who shows up when everything falls apart. Thunder didn't save Emma because he was trained to. He saved her because love recognizes no boundaries between species, age, or circumstance. Frank and Sarah Morrison could have walked away from a traumatic situation, but instead they chose to open their hearts to a child who needed them most. At 62 and 59, they discovered that it's never too late to become the parents you were meant to be. Their story proves that our golden years aren't about winding down. They're about stepping up when life calls us to our greatest purpose. Emma found her forever family not through genetics, but through the courage of two people who understood that real love means protecting the vulnerable, nurturing the broken, and creating safe spaces where healing can happen. In a world that often feels cold and disconnected, Thunder's loyalty and the Morrisons' dedication remind us that genuine love still exists, still matters, and still has the power to transform lives. Tell us, have you ever experienced an unexpected bond that changed your life? What would you do if you witnessed a child in danger?